All right, welcome. Got a couple more coming in. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to kick it over to my panelists for some quick intros and bios. So take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen at Wright. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Growth for Constellation. Constellation is the largest supplier of clean power in the U.S. Here in Illinois, we specifically supply 11,000 megawatts of power. That's from six sites and 11 operating units. So I thought it'd be fun to just give you a couple fun facts in my intro about how much power that is. So I went to ChatGPT, which, I'm sure we'll talk about the data economy here. So I used about 10 times more energy here on my ChatGPT search than a Google search. But the city's peak demand was around 11,000 megawatts, so we could fully power the city of Chicago with our power. And just one more fun fact was that NASA's Kennedy Space Center uses about 140 megawatts. So 11,000 megawatts would power it 78 times over. So all that being said, we have a lot of clean power.
How about that? Yes? Fantastic. I'm Nina Dudnik. I am the Chief Commercial Officer for Current. Current is based here in Chicago. We are turning the Great Lakes region into an international hub for water innovation and the circular water economy. What does that mean? Yes, somebody in the front row is raising his eyebrows. What that means is we think about water quality and water use and reuse. We're funding and driving research on this topic, turning that research into companies and building the workforce to power that next generation economy.
Good afternoon. I'm Harley Johnson. I'm a professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and I'm the director and CEO of the new Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park, which is a massive public-private partnership that will be built out at the former U.S. Steel Southworks site on the south side of the city. It's a project that will focus on scale-up of quantum computing. And as we go through the session this afternoon, we can talk a little bit more about quantum computing if you're interested. It's just great to be here with the panel.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alejandra Castillo. I'm a senior fellow at Purdue Northwest, former assistant secretary for economic development at the U.S. Department of Commerce. So if anyone here was or is a participant of the Build Back Better, the tech hubs, the Good Jobs Challenge, or anything EDA, we had a great opportunity in the last administration to invest over $6.8 billion in places across America that needed these investments. So I'm delighted to be a recent resident of the Midwest. You asked me why the Midwest. I really believe what's happening in the Midwest is pretty special. And not only are we working with quantum, but also water, which in my estimation will be our next big crisis. So how we manage that, how we ensure that we're protecting our resources, but also supporting workforce development, which was one of the comments in the previous panel, is key to what I'm also trying to do at Purdue Northwest.
All right, so we're here to talk about collaboration. So I want to get a little bit from each of you about your organization, your group's particular flavor of collaboration, because it's a little different for each one, but I think that'll give people an idea where we're at. Take it away, whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to kick it off. So one of the reasons I'm on this panel, other than just being a representative of the cleanest power company in the country, is because we were part of the Midwest Alliance for Clean Hydrogen, which is MACH2, and it was the hydrogen hub that was awarded for the Midwest. An incredibly large coalition of partners came together to support that award by the DOE. Currently on hold, but it is a really good example of what brings the coalition together and why we are differentiated here in the Midwest and in Illinois in particular. And it's really because of everybody who's on the stage here. We have an incredible water resource here in the state. We have incredible power resources. And we have the most spectacular workforce and university system to be able to build that coalition. So when we bring those shared interests and goals together with the value that we can bring to the state, and you drive that forward with federal or state funding or additional economic investment, we can have just an incredible impact on how we transition the economy, how we invest in new clean energy, how we invest in the clean energy future and the future for our children. So we're still on hold on the mach hub here, but that's just a little flavor of what brought us together and why I'm
Tell
here.
us a little bit about exactly what Mach 2 was designed to do, and which of the many competitions that you ran that it was a part of.
Yeah, so the Mach 2 hub was part of the DOE's funding for hydrogen development. So really, hydrogen, the 98% of hydrogen in the market today is supplied by dirty sources of hydrogen. And so how do you clean that up and decarbonize really hard to decarbonize sectors? Hydrogen provides a really great opportunity to do that. It can decarbonize transportation, industry like steel, manufacturing. It's really like this spectacular resource to be able to decarbonize a lot of those industries that we are consistently challenged to find paths for decarbonization. But the way you produce hydrogen when you produce it in a clean way is through a process called electrolysis. There are other paths to do that as well, but the focus was around electrolysis. So how do we use electrons to split essentially water, so H2O. This is much easier for me to explain. I was telling Harley, it's much easier for me to explain hydrogen production than it is quantum. So don't ask me, ask Harley the questions about quantum. I'm not here for that.
Harley said you knew it all. So he was,
Yeah. I can make some stuff up if you want to hear me get creative.
That's what I
But-
do too. I mostly make it up.
Yeah.
strategy.
But anyways, the goal of the DOE funding was really to drive investment in this sector because the differential between clean hydrogen production and the hydrogen production today is substantial. If you're talking about buying hydrogen from, a dirty process, it's $1 versus $5, $3. And so that differential in price is something that needed to be driven down to make the economics work. But when you can make the economics work for clean hydrogen, there's incredible alignment around the incentives and the value for a community to invest in clean hydrogen, from the decarbonization value to the workforce development and the community investment and the economic development. So all of those kind of shared goals was what brought the coalition together between the university systems across the state to the current water and others in the industry who were really looking at how we could drive this value forward for the industry, and it was driven largely by that federal funding. So in this state of flux, we see a little bit of a pause there. But
How many states?
it was Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, and that was primarily it, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to give context from a national perspective because so many times we've heard of flyover states, right? Where technology has, for better or for worse, lived kind of on our coasts.
Right.
And there was a very deliberate and intentional approach to many of these grants and many of these competitions, which was one, coalition building. Many partners, I'm sure, in this room have met each other, have worked with each other, maybe one-offs. We wanted to make sure that it was a coalition as synergistic as possible. The second part was geography. How did we make sure that the federal government could seed these technologies and innovation in a way that could, as you well said, reduce the cost and then incentivize the private sector? I think we did that. The hope was that there would be a second wave that would then push it to the next stage. The unfortunate part is that now everything's on hold. So there is a huge question mark whether these big bets will actually blossom. I know that quantum will, because there's a lot of intentionality coming from the state. And that is what we need to replicate more, particularly at this moment of such uncertainty. So I just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork. And what we're seeing is that the middle of the country is now really thriving, whether it's quantum or hydrogen hubs or drone technology in Oklahoma. I mean, there are so many places that never imagined that they had the opportunity. And now, because of these coalitions, we were able to bring those assets forward.
So what was the goal or the spark behind those? Several of those competitions not only sought but required collaboration between states, between groups. What was the thinking behind that? It doesn't seem like it was by accident.
It wasn't by accident, but it required a lot of selling on the Hill. So the way we sold these concepts was primarily national security. That was the selling point to get a lot of particularly Republicans to invest. On the Democratic side, it was place-based economic development, places that have been left behind that needed that jolt. So both sides of the aisle needed a different argument, but the strongest piece was a national security argument.
Okay.
I spent decades in Boston before moving back to the Midwest, and you see this, there's an enormous amount of scholarship around hubs like Boston, Silicon Valley. There are certain key sectors that you need to have at the table over and over and over again to build innovation ecosystems. And most of the time, it's a zero-sum game in terms of seeking funding or customers or whatever it is. There's actually disincentive to work together, but you need everybody to work together to make it actually work, right? In a place like Massachusetts, it's taken something like, since basically the end of World War II to become what it is in terms of, say, life sciences. How do you do it faster? I think that's what's been so extraordinary about these investments. Current is the coordinator of one of the 9 National Science Foundation regional innovation engines. Right. And it was the same idea, the same huge, I think, really forward-thinking proposition of how do you do that in less than 75 years? Right. And you have to do it by making sure, not just encouraging people to collaborate, but actually incentivizing it. And it helps a lot when the only way to get the funding is to work together. It changes everything.
Tell us briefly about Current and particularly Renew.
So Current is roughly 9 years old, spun out of the city of Chicago, the MWRD, World Business Chicago, local institutions, and around this idea that we have resources in this area, in the Great Lakes, that are unparalleled around, right? And you alluded to it. Water is utterly fundamental, not just for human life, animal and plant life, and all of the next-gen industries. We talk an enormous amount about how much energy things like quantum take, but they all rely on water. They are all powered by water as well. And so what better place to think about that and to develop all of the next set of innovations and companies and workforce around those kinds of technologies than the place that has access to 20% of the world's fresh water, which is what the Great Lakes has.
All right. Everybody
I can't
loves
believe
beaches.
the water got a cheer, but the nuclear power didn't.
Yes.
I mean, I'm deeply offended.
You can only go for 2 days without water. You can't go for longer without nuclear energy. But sorry, your second question was Current. So Current and the Renew, Great Lakes Renew, is a coalition of about 60-odd partners across 6 states in the Great Lakes region. And that's across academia, industry, startups, entrepreneurial support organizations, all of those different sectors.
And the thing you're tackling is trying to get rid of forever chemicals get them out of the water,
That's
yes?
one of the aspects, yep. Our sort of tagline is waste to wealth. That covers a lot of different things. It covers reclaiming useful things out of water as well, right? A lot of talk about rare earth minerals these days. You can recover those out of wastewater, as well as other kinds of nutrients and different useful compounds, as well as, yes, PFAS chemicals, lead, things like that. But also thinking about how do we use water more efficiently, more economically efficiently. There's a strong connection between water and energy. So we're tackling a number of those questions.
And Harley might use some water, I think.
Well, we can always use power and water. That's true. Yes, thank you. I was just going to comment on something that Alejandra said and maybe offer a little story about some of the collaborative history of the IQMP. It does go back to some of the work done in the previous administration and some of the funding opportunities that came through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science Act. At that time, from the university perspective, we are sort of customers of some of those types of R&D programs, and we set out to really build a deliberate strategy to go after some of these opportunities. We worked with Colleen's company on mHUB hub, but really around quantum and microelectronics, the goal was deliberately to create a strategy to better position the state of Illinois for some of those opportunities. And actually in doing so, we reach across state lines. Some of the earliest work we've done in quantum has been with our friends in Indiana and in Michigan. So that's one of the early victories in the CHIPS and Science Act for us. But we did focus and make a deliberate effort to develop a strategy for the state of Illinois. And that's really what led us to form the group that has become the IQMP. And just to touch on sort of one of your questions, we talk a lot in that project about radical collaboration. from the point of view of the universities, we love to compete with each other. And that's not a secret, and we'll always do that. I think it's healthy. But we recognized in this opportunity in particular that the problem was so big that we really needed to join forces, and it would benefit all of us if we did that. So that's how U of I, University of Chicago, Northwestern, actually all of the campuses of the University of Illinois got together, along with Chicago State, city colleges, and the national labs. And that became a sort of a template for the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park. And I think the story is kind of similar in some of these other projects. I mean, you have to build radical collaborations that are a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to be competitive for these kinds of opportunities.
And I just want to also put it back into context. For example, the Tech Hub is a $10 billion program.
Right.
We only got $500 million. The U.S. has failed to invest in economic development for over a generation, actually. When you compare us to the OECD countries, we're 12th. So all of this happened in a 4-year span, and speed was of the essence because we needed to make sure that places around the country really had an economic engine. And we're still in the infancy stages, but as you know, possibly 130,000 jobs in the next 10 years in the quantum space. How do we now get ready from a workforce development to make sure that all of this starts to really drive that economic growth?
So, Harley, the quantum folks were probably a little further along in collaboration and in a very good spot when the opportunity arrived than some other industries and even some other projects. Tell us a little bit about that, because what I'm specifically thinking about is the quantum exchange. You guys are a card-carrying member, that got some universities together rowing in the same direction. Goes back to the original grant that I think it was $200 million from the state of Illinois early on. That didn't always happen. So give us some context on that. What changed, and where were we? You've been at this a while. You've seen the competition between universities. Tell me why it's so different where we're at now and where we were. Because now it looks like everybody was doing it, and we've always done it, but most people, or some people in this room, can tell you that's not been the case.
Right, so there is a history there, and I think the Chicago Quantum Exchange was really one of the organizations that got us on the right path and got us moving in the same direction. It did happen in sort of 2017, 2018 timeframe. That was around the time of the state's first big investment in quantum, and that catalyzed a kind of a collaboration between the universities in particular, but also the national labs, and really incentivized us, forced us maybe, together in a good way to start to make plans around, preparing ourselves for some of the big federal funding opportunities. What happened in the couple of years that followed was the state of Illinois won 4 of the 10 major quantum centers that were funded by the federal government. 4 out of 10 are in the state of Illinois, and that's still true. That is, it's clearly unmatched by any other state in the country. And so that was the frame, that's what was in place for us when we started to think about the next opportunities, right, that were coming out through CHIPS and Science and so on. So we were already moving in the right direction. And that was just a new way of thinking for universities, especially public universities working with private universities, working with national labs. We all got moving in the same direction. That's very important.
And it's not just the federal government that is sort of knocking heads or pushing people together and requiring, to get the prize, you got to work together. And I guess where I saw it on the private sector that I thought was really interesting, we saw it here in Chicago, was with the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub that required multiple institutions to work together to even bid for the project. So it looks like the private sector is on board with this idea as well. Is that starting to sink in at the lab level at universities to get people to start thinking about the collaboration first before it's forced on them sort of at the end? Are people starting to internalize that?
Yes, I think I can address that. I think the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub is a great example, and I think what comes to mind when we think about that model is that, the way that universities work is that you have centers of excellence in certain areas that build up, excellence in a certain area at Northwestern, and excellence in a certain area in Urbana, excellence in another area in Hyde Park at the University of Chicago. And some of these big problems require collaboration among those three areas of excellence, right? So no one university can do it. And so I think that's the thinking, is that just the nature of the way the university, research works, you need multiple universities to come together. And when you have a region that has, a number of great universities that are in close proximity and that start getting used to really working together, then you can make progress much faster.
I'll say that a previous panelist spoke about that, and she said, share and collaborate as quickly as possible, because it used to be the paradigm where you would collaborate after the fact.
Right.
And now there's an incentive, both because of the speed of technology and how quickly you want to make sure that you're in this space, that the collaboration becomes paramount. The federal government has seen that. Academia is seeing it. Private sector is seeing it. Nonprofit organizations are also seeing it. So I think that the secret sauce is the coalition and the collaboration.
Is that collaboration, and I'm thinking particularly here, not just among universities, but also among states and big partners, is that something that will help these efforts survive? We're in an environment now where we've had a change in administration, federal funding for research there's certainly a question mark there, but does the collaborative nature of these things give us a better shot that maybe they survive?
I'll tell you, just quantum will need not just Chicago and Illinois, it's going to need Indiana. Why? Because the infrastructure that's going to power quantum runs through Indiana. So just on the assets, you're going to need this, state collaboration. You're going to need the state collaboration in terms of water and the water rights, right? So there's so many different layers of why the collaboration is going to be needed, and we can't speak about economic growth from a state-to-state perspective. I travel the South Shore line every day, and it's fascinating. People get off that train at 7 a.m. coming from all the way from South Bend. This is the transition or how people flow, and economic growth and technology flows equally without any state border or city limits.
I think these are topics that are completely bipartisan. Everyone survives on water. And so that is, I think, one of the things that makes me very hopeful about the work that we're doing is that, we work across 6 states. That includes Ohio, includes Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois. That we've had bipartisan support from the very beginning. And because this touches everybody, and everybody from a personal and a professional level understands how they are affected by this. So I'm hopeful that that continues to foster that sense of collaboration, as well as the funding that supports it.
I'll just add that I think there's a legacy of these coalitions as well that survives and outlasts what they were formed originally to do. And so that cross-university collaboration, the collaboration with Argonne National Lab, the collaboration with different industry partners within the region, those things are long-standing, and the work that we do to build the coalitions for one purpose or another are going to help us drive towards, the next big transition and the next big challenge, which, right now, there's been a huge transition over the last year around the data economy, and how are we going to power America's national security? And how are we positioning Illinois to be a leader in driving America's national security? And that there's a critical coalition around that in the state as well that's beginning to form without any, additional funding, because there's shared value in the coalition, and there's the existing relationships and the legacy of prior coalitions that I think drive the.
And it's the
two
only
together.
way to achieve the critical mass that makes this work.
Is that particularly true in the Midwest, or is that true everywhere?
If you have to draw your region of action for defining that, right? So I hate to keep invoking Boston because I know it's a four-letter word, but there's 122 colleges and universities in Massachusetts alone.
Right.
So that is a region that maybe has the critical mass for certain things, right? It has a critical mass now in terms of an investor class, has a critical mass of industry, or large corporate partners in a specific set of industries. If we want to compete in any particular one of these industries, we need that same set of critical mass. And how big of an area do you need to draw from to get that, achieve that critical mass? Because individually, separately, atomizing this, we will not succeed. But all of us together create that kind of momentum and leverage the resources and the assets and the complementary skills to be able to do it.
Yeah, I don't think that Midwest is differentiated in that drive to try to, improve and differentiate the region, because you have regions like Boston, like New York, like, Maryland, in California. You've got regions who are all trying to compete for the same type of business. Like Carly talking about winning 4 out of 10 quantum funding opportunities. I mean, this is just an example of how we need to be able to work together to compete for those opportunities, because we are not, we're only the best when we're all together. We're not the best when we stand alone.
Yeah.
And so being able to bring the team together in the Midwest to differentiate this region, to drive funding, drive investment, drive people here, that's the only way we're going to continue to differentiate not just the state, but also the U.S. economy as well.
Do you think the collaborations and the coalitions that have been formed recently survive the next 4 years?
I'd like to believe they do.
I think we're going to get a test of the funding and the programs that put these coalitions together. It may or may not survive.
The key question will be, one, you're right, who leads these coalitions and how do they stay as closely together? The funding is going to be different, obviously. So how do we now not only bring in philanthropy, both national philanthropy and regional philanthropy? How do we bring in, private sector capital? How do we make sure that there's different types of capital stacks to continue to build on this? And as well as we need to talk about commercialization. You're right, Boston has many universities, but how do we commercialize all of this great work? Our national labs are fantastic, but when it comes to commercialization, we could do better. So that's going to be the big push, because the intent is to create the next industries, the industries of the future. And in order to do that, you have to have the services, the product. That's why I love what you're doing with the Algorithm Center, because that's going to produce so many different startups, as well as different companies that hopefully 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say, wow, we were there when they started, right?
So we've talked a lot about collaboration and what it means in terms of putting together projects, getting them funded, moving them forward. What's collaboration, particularly when you start talking multi-institution, multi-state, what's that mean for the talent equation?
The talent equation.
Yeah, in terms of attracting talent, it certainly has been great at attracting funding.
Yeah.
But when you guys are all about talent, that's always been the key to research and development. Do you see any signs that the collaboration that has brought in some pretty significant projects also starts to attract talent in a way that you previously didn't? I mean, it's not like the universities here don't attract great talent by themselves, but are you seeing any signs that these collaborations, these big projects, make people sit up, take notice, and the talent starts moving in a way it didn't before?
Yes, and I think that's happening on several different levels, but I can sort of start by reflecting on the way that we produce graduates from our engineering programs, and the ways that they look for opportunities. I mean, I think historically, from the point of view of an institution like U of I, a lot of the technology that's come out of there has itself been exported to the coasts, and the jobs have followed, right? And that's always been a goal for us, is to bring the technology, or keep the technology in the region so that the jobs stay here. And I think that is, we're starting to see that with, hiring among quantum companies. They're going to hire the best talent, and they're going to, attract them from wherever they can get them. One of the things that differentiates our region from, for example, Boston is, and I came from Boston also, so I can, I moved here from Boston 24 years ago. They have a lot of educational institutions, but altogether, I'm not sure they produce as many graduates as the Midwest sort of educational ecosystem. If you think of all the Big Ten schools, we're just huge. And that's an advantage, right? So if we can keep the technology here, we have an engine to produce the talent, right? And we need to create opportunities for those folks to stay here. And I'll just add, I think, on the industry side, we are starting to see talent moving in this direction, or at least there's a lot of interest in in the startup companies, small companies, relocating here for certain opportunities that we're creating around quantum. And so that's another way to attract talent, is to create incentives for companies to locate, provide infrastructure, provide opportunities. And that's certainly in our project, that's one of the big goals. It's an economic development mission. Last thing I'll say on talent is just we have partnerships in the communities that we are very hopeful will bring new people into technology, new people into quantum who have been trained locally. Maybe they're looking for opportunities in the community colleges to enter a new career path. We're very dedicated to trying to create those opportunities and work with the local institutions, especially on the South Side, for example, to bring in some of the talent that's there that is untapped.
I'd like to respond to that as well by adding that with the same intentionality that we develop these programs and these competitions, the next phase is how do we build ecosystems? Because it's not just having a great technology. You also have to think about from the technician to the PhD. Where are they going to live? How will they transport themselves? Where will their children go to school? Or childcare? I mean, it's a broader ecosystem that takes a lot of intentionality. The south side of Chicago is fascinating to me. I drive through it. I look at it from different angles because you want to make sure that those individuals who will be working at the proximity of the IQMP have, a true quality of life, and they want to stay there, right? Same thing with the broader region of Indiana. We're facing that challenge with upstate New York, where they got a lot of money for lithium batteries as well as micro semiconductors, but there are no people. So how do you, to your point, how do you attract folks? Where will the workforce housing exist? Market rate housing as well, and everything that comes into a much broader ecosystem to really build those industrial spots across the country.
I think even one layer in from that, in terms of ecosystem, just around it, all of it's a flywheel. So we can have great science and technology and terrific undergrads coming out who have trained in it. Who's going to run the startups? We have to be able to either train folks who are here or attract people who are elsewhere. Right? So, and how do we keep them here? Well, they need access to physical resources, right? They need access to mentorship and advising. They also need access to money. And I see a few people with vests in the room who are at least dressed like VCs, so I'm going to assume there are some VCs in the room.
Uh-oh. You've been outed.
I set myself a homework assignment 2 summers ago after I'd moved back to Chicago to interview venture capitalists on both the East Coast and the Midwest. And I asked the folks on the East Coast, what makes a company inherently more investable when it moves from Chicago to Boston? And they said it's not the technology, obviously. It's their access to mentorship and leadership talent that is here in, again, critical mass. You find a mentor, they're kind of a dud, you can find another one tomorrow. We have to make sure that that's true here. But if it is true here, they have to also be able to get money. And when I asked Chicago-based investors what % of their portfolio were Chicago-based companies, most of them hadn't calculated it.
Or shared it.
Maybe they didn't want to tell me. Some of them told me it wasn't a very high number. And part of that is because they were syndicating with investors on the East or West coasts who aren't going to look beyond their backyards for deals. We have an opportunity. If we don't invest here, who will? But we also have an amazing opportunity because everything at least in Boston right now, is massively overvalued because they all got money in 2021. These are good deals if we invest here. But we have to do that and lead others to it because they don't have to do the legwork. We've already done the legwork. We're right here. So all of those pieces have to keep lining up. It's a virtuous cycle. We have to work on all of them or the talent isn't going to stay.
For sure. Alejandra, not to put you on the spot too much, but given the fact that you traveled the country for several years, evaluating programs and handing out money, how does the Midwest stack up in terms of our level of collaboration and what it leads to? I mean, you looked at a lot of deals, you looked at a lot of submissions to programs. What did you think of the Midwest versus our peers?
I mean, obviously, I'm in the Midwest, so I see the potential. But I do want to tease it out a bit more because I think there's a need for more capacity building. There's a need for more, from the economic development side, more understanding of how other places have also organized themselves. You look at Phoenix, for example. 20 years ago, Phoenix, in terms of its leadership and how it organized itself to pitch for deals, was not there. And now you have incredible investments coming to Phoenix. Now, don't get me started on the water issue, because that's a different,
Seems to be a challenge.
It's a challenge, and yet they're making a big bet on semiconductors, right? Which requires a lot of water. But in any case, that's for another panelist. I think your point is a great one. If I could retire this term of flyover state, I could die happy, because the capital has to be present. The capital, the broader entrepreneurship ecosystem. You said it beautifully, the mentorship, just making sure that people who come here stay here because they know that there's a broader community like mHUB that has their back. It's not for the faint of heart to be an entrepreneur in America today. You need to have a broad and very reliant ecosystem. So I believe that the Midwest fares very well, but again, we need to make sure that we're building greater capacity to get that done.
What's the Midwest superpower in terms of when it comes to collaboration and trying to do big things?
People, resources.
And anybody can chime in on that.
Nuclear power.
Well, there you go. Not that you have an interest in that.
There really is something to not being an oversaturated ecosystem. I was an entrepreneur in Boston, and you go to an event, and it's 99% entrepreneurs, 1% investors, and everyone is looking over your shoulder for somebody more interesting who's going to pitch to them next, right? We don't have to do that here. It makes it a little, right? So if we can collectively, I think, what we need to do, if you're an entrepreneur here, who do you go knock on the door of first? We have to make it super easy to make that happen, because what I've seen, at least, is that it is far more, and maybe that's a Midwest cliche, but it is nicer and far more collaborative. And let's use that, because depending on what sector you are in, the resources are here. They are sometimes nascent, but they are here. But we got to make it easier to connect all those dots.
Does the scale help? Is that something that we have that others don't? You mentioned the Big Ten, and just the sheer output of people with STEM degrees.
Yeah, I think the scale helps a lot, and I think besides the clean power and the clean water, I do think it is the people. I mean, I think it's just the huge number of people in the ecosystem who are willing to work together and collaborative. A little bit of Midwest humility is probably good, but we also need to be bold. But I think that there's a willingness to work together and to collaborate that is pretty unique.
Is there a cost advantage? We talk about it sometimes as a disadvantage, but given just the relative cost factors of doing something big or something industrial, here, is that an advantage? And are we taking enough? Are we using it enough as an advantage?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think to give you an example, the lead company that's working with us at the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park is PsiQuantum. They're based in Palo Alto. they looked all over the country for a site to do this big project. This is a big, big physical scale project. I think they started with 19 states on the list, and they ended up focusing on the state of Illinois, a couple of sites, and that led them to the Southworks site because they wanted to do something big, and they needed a particular kind of ecosystem that included power, that included all the talent in the area, but they saw something here that they didn't see anywhere else.
I want to build on that. The boldness of what you all are doing is important on so many levels. And I think it's also contagious because, I've worked with many people now in the region, and I tell them all the time, you got to think bigger. And there's fear. But the fact that they can now see it and how it's coming to life inspires them. And I have to say, the governor here is bold, a visionary. I mean, I worked for his sister, Penny Pritzker, and there wasn't a time when she didn't push us. So pushing this region to think more boldly and to have the elements and the ingredients to support that and to see it is really remarkable.
So no pressure, Harley.
Not true.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're gonna leave it there. Thank you guys for a great discussion, and thank you for coming out.